Kia ora. Welcome to Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. I'm Andy Dixon. It's good to have you here.
On Earth.
On Earth.
On Earth.
On Earth.
On Earth as it is in heaven.
On Earth as it is.
On Earth as it is in heaven.
Down to Earth.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of Down to Earth Conversations. Today we have a bit of a different episode for you. I was keen on sharing a bit more of my story with you. I do a lot of asking other people about their lives, about what they're up to, and I thought it was about time that I shared a little bit more of my journey. And yet, the premise of the whole podcast is conversations, so I didn't want to just have a big monologue where I talk at you and there was no interaction. So I went in search of someone who could take over for an episode and ask me all those questions instead. So today we have Down to Earth Conversations, the Spanky Moore Takeover Edition. For those who don't know him, Spanky is a former punk and radio DJ who is now an ordained Anglican minister and is chaplain at the University of Canterbury. Spanky is also co-host with his friend Scotty Reeve of the 21 Elephants podcast, which you should definitely go and check out. Lots of laughs, lots of insight, lots of amazing, crazy stories. So yeah, go check them out. But today, Spanky takes over. This is episode 12 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's Spanky Moore interviewing me, Andy Dixon.
All right, so you happy with your popper stopper?
Yeah.
You see that's made out of pantyhose?
Yeah.
Do you like that?
Yeah, it's pretty classic.
Because every time I go to do a podcast with old Scotty, because we kind of get together once a year,
Yeah.
we've lost all of the makeshift equipment that we had from the previous year. So he was down only a few weeks ago, and I was sort of going through my wife's pantyhose drawer desperately, finding old coat hangers to make a popper stopper.
This is totally up your alley with the do what you can
like
with
that?
what you have.
Bit of tape.
Yeah.
It sounds just as good through a piece of pantyhose
Yeah.
as it does through a professional popper stopper.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
Nice to see you, Andy. One of the kind of things in my life has been that I used to, for a number of years, be like a breakfast host on a radio station.
Yeah.
And so I used to get to do, I think it was about 4 interviews every morning. So I think I sometimes worked it out. I would have done thousands of interviews. And the key thing used to be that on any subject that you can sound interested for 5 minutes. You see? So that was always that was my greatest weapon, is that I could be kind of vaguely speak. I don't think with intelligence, but that I knew one thing about any subject so I could talk about for 5 minutes. So I guess it's I just find it's always fun to sort of hear about people's stories, hear about their lives, understand what makes them tick.
Yeah, cool.
So how old are you?
I'm turning 40 in September.
Oh, really? I'm turning 40 in November. How
On,
do you feel?
on election day.
Ooh,
Yeah.
how
So
exciting.
I'm going to have a political party.
Pretty exciting time, isn't it? Isn't
Yeah.
it a great time to be alive? I
Yep.
just am so grateful for the politics of this country and the things happening. How do you feel about turning 40?
Yeah, it's good. A new chapter, well, it's all a new chapter at the moment because by the time people are listening to this, I'll be no longer a pastor.
Really?
Yeah. So we've had redundancy, restructure stuff happening post lockdown. So,
So
different.
So that's a whole new. So right now, how do you feel about that? Are you like?
Oh, it's been a really
excited or
tumultuous time. Yeah, ever since lockdown. But I got offered some stuff, little part-time bits and pieces, but ended up making a call to not take that and to start a new chapter. So, yeah, having made that decision, I'm now feeling at peace with that, and then just giving myself time to rest from having really emotional kind of period, but yeah, with a little tinge of excitement in the background of, I wonder what's going to happen here. And I guess inspired by all the stories of people that I've been interviewing, so that, yeah, I've got something that's kind of burning inside me that is inspired by all these stories to then get out and do something that's going to make a difference.
Well, it's kind of that pregnancy time, the latent, there's something growing, fermenting,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
sort of waiting to see what bursts out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess people don't think about, again, I work as a chaplain here at Canterbury University, but work for the Anglican Church. And yeah, I think people haven't realised that it's not just in New Zealand that there's knock-on consequences for, but actually all organisations
Yeah.
have meant that they've all had to do some hard work to think around those things.
Yeah.
But it was funny, I had a similar thing as when I realised we were living in a time of uncertainty and nothing was sure. In a year's time,
Yeah.
no one knew. I also felt a strange exhilaration, which was like, that sense of what could be is quite an exciting thing. So, hey, so where did you grow up?
Started life in the Hawke's Bay in Hastings, and apart from a brief stint in Papua New Guinea for 1.5 years when I was 2 to when I was 3.5, I lived there right through till I was mid-high school, and that was when we moved down to Christchurch for the first time. So,
Were your folks what were they doing in Papua New Guinea?
yeah, so people always assume that they were missionaries.
I was going to almost say that. And
yeah,
I thought,
totally.
Well, it might be something else.
We were part of the Open Brethren Church, and there was a lot of missionaries from the Open Brethren Church over there. But actually, Dad was an accountant for Nissan.
It's a kind of mission work.
Yeah. He had a 2-year contract, and we were there for 1.5 years, and then he got offered his old job back at Ford to be an accountant in Ford back in Hastings. So,
Wow.
So we came home.
Of course, you have no memory of being over there.
I've got memories, but I don't know if they're real because they look really similar to photos that we've got. And so, like, once you put photos and stories together, that creates an image in your mind. But I don't know how real those images are or not.
What did you do for fun as a kid? Like, what was the thing that filled your heart with
Sport
joy?
and music were my two things. I started playing sport at a very young age. Dad played top club cricket in Hawke's Bay and played rugby for Hawke's Bay back in the 70s and early 80s. And so it was just part of family life that sport was around. I don't remember listening to music on the radio until I was about 12 because we listened to News Talk ZB and Radio Sport. So yeah, but somewhere along...
Did you play cricket or was that your...
I played cricket. I played football to start with and then switched to rugby and played that right through until my early 20s. But yeah, any sport I could get my hand on, I was keen on.
And how did you do music? Or what did you play something?
Yeah, so music was that started for me when I had my first holiday without my parents. We'd gone up to Gisborne where my grandparents were, and then they left me there to stay with my grandparents, and then I was to fly home, which that's a whole experience in itself because I get motion sick and it's like a half-hour flight and I threw up like 7 times. But
Wouldn't want to sit next to you.
But no, and well, the poor guy who was sitting next to me, my grandma had decided that the bags on the airplanes weren't safe. They weren't thick enough or something.
For your particular kind of vomit.
So she gave me like a bread bag that was see-through. And so here's me like hard out vomiting, and eventually the guy next to me helped me put it inside one of the bags from the airplane so that he didn't have to look at it.
Yeah.
But no, so while I was there for the week, my grandma was like, oh, well, better find something for you to do. So she went and bought a book called Teaching Little Fingers How to Play and just started me with some easy piano stuff.
Wow.
And when we came home, I'd enjoyed it. So I talked to Mum and Dad and they got me one of the teenagers from church started giving me lessons after school. So that kind of started off a whole thing. And get to high school, and I went to a school that was rubbish at music. So they were offering really cheap lessons so they could get better. And so I was doing drums and guitar and vocals for a total of $10 a term.
Not bad.
Which was like less than one piano lesson. By that stage, I was having like proper piano lessons. So yeah, I had about 8 years of piano lessons and played guitar and drums and stuff right through school and then went to performing arts school, so just carried that on.
Oh, wow. So where did you go to performing arts school?
I went to Excel, which is a Christian-based performing arts school up in Auckland. Spent a year doing this study then they pick about a quarter of the first year students to go on a tour of the country. So I guess the thing that I crack up about is that I'd got really into singing in high school, and so I auditioned as a vocalist, and then they looked at my application and saw that I played piano, and so they accepted me as a keyboard player, which I don't know what that says about my vocal ability, but then after a year of learning the keyboard, they then picked the team to go on this tour, and they picked me as a sound guy. Yeah, that was one of those funny moments where, as like a young Christian, I was all fired up, and I was, God, if you get me on this tour, I'm going to go on this tour, and it's going to be for you, and all this kind of stuff. And I never thought at any stage to put a thing in that contract that I was making that said, like, as a keyboard player.
Yeah.
And so then I'd made this commitment that if I get in the team, I'm going. And then I got selected as the guy who only ever gets noticed when he makes a mistake.
Yeah, sound guys get you're ignored. And
Totally.
How many times have you seen those people turn around and look at the sound guy?
If you do your job well, nobody notices.
Like a bass player.
If you make a mistake, everybody looks.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be the cool guy up on stage, so I was really gutted. But I'd made this commitment, so I followed through. And what was really cool about it is that it taught me humility. It taught me the art of being part of something without having to be the face of something, and that was a huge life lesson for me. That actually that's carried on right through. That I'm really happy to be a team player, and to just get in, do the mahi without having to necessarily get recognition for it. And actually, as I kind of came to that point, that point in the tour, where I was okay with it, then one of our guys, we mostly performed at school, so we had the school holidays, and one of the guys who was a singer and a rapper, he didn't come back after the holidays for some reason, and so he wasn't there on time, and so we're all on the bus going to the first school that we're going to perform at, and all the dancers were like, well, who's going to do that song, because we don't want to drop it because it's our best dance song. It was like a remix rap version of "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees.
Right.
This
story
and
gets
of course,
better and better. You see.
Of course, I'm up the back of every performance, so I'm hearing every word like up to 4 times a day at a range of different schools around the country. And so,
can you know this sounds like a movie?
Yeah, totally.
This actually sounds like what a movie is.
And so I'm up the back listening to all of this, and so I knew all the words, and so we're on the bus and. They're like, oh, who knows all the words? And I'm like, I do. And there's this like really awkward silence. and because as they're all looking at this little white guy, and then they turn around and it's like, who else knows all the words?
They do not. Do they do that? That's
and so then, yeah, it was pretty classic. But actually, I was the only one who knew all the words. So they were like, okay, well, we'll give it a shot. And there were 2 sound guys on the tour. So the other guy was going to take over when I went up to do the rap, and we had a whole bunch of amazing singers and stuff. Some have gone on to do some great stuff, so real good singers, and they were like, oh bro, we'll back you up, we'll and you could just tell it was like a, hey bro, we've got no confidence in you at all. And so I got up and just...
You got this, man. We have total confidence.
Totally.
It was like, they have no confidence in me.
But yeah, got up and absolutely smashed it, and they were all just like stoked as, and I didn't even hear them the whole time. They were going to back me up, but they were just speechless. And so that was pretty funny because that kind of birthed something in me, and I really enjoyed it. And when the other guy came back, I ended up partnering with him to do it, and he did the first verse and I did the second verse, and it was pretty classic.
It's an interesting story of that painful learning of humility, which I think you say it fast, like I really learned humility, and it's like fuming behind that death. Hey, all of those emotions bubbling up as you sort of work out, am I going to die to this, or what do I do with that? But then also birthing your love of performing.
Well, I guess I'd already had that love of performing, but the previous love of performing was about wanting my identity to be shaped by that, so that I became the cool guy on stage. Whereas having gone through that process of becoming part of a team without being that guy, I could then get up on stage and have fun and interact with people, and that was really enjoyable, but it didn't make me any more worthwhile than when I was back on the sound desk.
Yeah.
And that was a huge thing that I needed to learn.
How old were you then?
20.
That's pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a young age to learn that very
Yeah.
difficult lesson. I still haven't learned that
Oh,
lesson, so
I
I'm
think-
very impressed.
I think I've learnt it many times since.
Yeah.
Just when you're kind of forgetting it, you learn it again.
Hey, so how did you go from? I mean, so was there a point in your life when you said, actually, I want ministry and studying the Bible and pastoring. I want this to be a big part of my vocation. Like, when did that piece happen?
So I did the 2 years of performing arts school, and then I went and studied sport management because I'm into music and sport. Interestingly, in my last 3 years of high school, they were my 2 lowest marks every single year, and I just kept doing them because I was into music and sport. But yeah, so I went and did a Bachelor of Sport Management, and then the year that I finished that degree, my lecturers offered me a job doing some tutoring. So I stayed on for a year, which turned into 10 actually.
Wow.
But I stayed on for a year, and there was a moment in that year where our third year students were doing these presentations, and I just remember sitting waiting for the next guy to set up and do his thing. And I'd had an experience a little bit earlier in the year of being asked by someone that they were the main speaker at an Easter camp in Taranaki, and they came and said to me, "Look, I've been praying about who to take with me, and I just really feel like you'd be a great person to come along, and so I've got 6 sessions to do, why don't you take one of them?" And I'd never considered doing anything like that, but I went, sure, sounds good to me. So I came along and I put a session together and did it, and it was really encouraging and something that I really enjoyed doing. And so I had that kind of in the back of my mind, and then I remember sitting in this room waiting for the student to get ready, going, I've just spent 3 years studying a degree that involves doing not-for-profit management, working with large numbers of volunteers, doing lots of public speaking and running lots of events, which is starting to sound quite a lot like a church.
Mm.
And I wonder if this is God's funny way of moving me towards that, and just kind of settled on that. And so that was 2004. And a few years down the track, that was still kind of just in the back of my mind. And then I was getting married in 2007, and while we were getting ready for the wedding, Beck said to me, "Look, I'm really over my job. For a number of years, I've wondered about going to Bible college, and so I'm thinking maybe I'll do that next year." And I was like, "Oh, great! I'll support you. I've got a job, so I'll keep doing that. You can go, and it's something I'd like to do. So maybe I'll do that later down the track." Because at the moment it makes more sense for me to stay working and keep supporting us. And I had a mentor at that stage, and I was telling him that. And I just remember as I was saying it to him, like, it just makes more sense. Suddenly sounded to me like, I'm really happy with money, thanks very much.
Mm.
And actually this would mean not having a lot of money. And it sure did mean that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I decided that wasn't a good enough reason not to go. So we got married in September. We saved for 4 months, and then we both left our jobs and went to what is now Laidlaw College, and lived off $350 a week.
Wow.
And our rent was $265 a week. And we dug into our savings to help us survive, and we got through the year. And then the original plan with that was, let's go and do that, and then we'll go back out into the workforce. But I just fell in love with it. So I was like, well, we're here, we're used to being poor, I'm really enjoying studying. We'd done a graduate diploma, and that then allowed me to get into a master's. So I went, I'll just stay here and do that, And Bex was sick of studying by then, so she actually got a job at Laidlaw doing student support. So it wasn't long before she had an office on one side of the library and I was in the master's office on the other side of the library, and I could lean back from my desk and see if she was ready for lunch.
That's so good.
And we lived a block away, and we could just walk there, and it was great. But so I was there, ended up being there for 3.5 years. And then I guess the real funny part about thinking about the humility thing, I finished that just amping to get into some sort of church vocation. I was going to take over the world and, change things. And, I had all these great ideas of what church could be. But there just wasn't anything that was the right thing for me. And I was trying to figure out what to do as I was finishing off my thesis, and my boss from I'd been working at Unitec up in Auckland doing the sport thing, and I'd gone to part-time while I was studying, but I was still doing some stuff there. And she rings me up and she says, one of the lecturers is going on maternity leave this semester, would you like to come in and cover that? I was like, oh yeah, okay. I kind of left that job knowing it's not what I wanted to do with my life, but there's nothing else happening, so I went and covered that maternity leave, and 2/3 of the way through that one, another staff member got pregnant, and so then I covered her maternity leave, and then that happened 2 more times, and so I ended up doing 2 years of working at this place that I'd gone, that's not what I want to do with my life anymore.
Yeah.
But I was back there going, okay, what's this about? And it was a really good time just to be reminded that actually just slow down a bit. You don't have to be in a hurry. It's not about going and taking over the world. It's about going and being in the place that you're in and being who you are and making a difference.
So it's interesting because like the threads of your vocational story, I'm thinking of sports coaching and working in that role at Unitec. There are plenty of people that go and study theology or New Testament, whom their dream is, I will go to Oxford and I'll get to lecture or research. Yeah. But it sounds like there's a deep drive within you that wants to work with people, be with people, develop people.
I think, one of the real key things for me, because I was trying to decide that, I really enjoy studying. Like if someone could pay me to study, I would study all the time. Assignments for me are a joy. They're a problem-solving challenge.
You know how many people will be hearing this
totally
right now, and they'll be questioning your sanity.
Everyone's switching off.
Yeah.
They really are. They're a problem-solving thing that brings me great joy, and going, how do I put these pieces together in a way that's going to get the best result? And I also just love writing. I love the creativity of writing, and so that gave me an avenue to do that, which was really cool. So I was weighing up, like, do I carry on into PhD? Do I, go down that route? But the one thing that kept just bugging me was that there were things that I'd gone to college and learnt that I really felt like the church should have taught me. And I was turning up going, wow, like I'm 27 by this stage. I've been in church my entire life, and there were things that I'd never heard before. Going, what's up with that? And so then I just developed this real passion to go, actually, I don't want to just sit in the academic world. I want to go back and help people learn to think well about this stuff and to wrestle with things that I'm wrestling with, but to not have to go to Bible college to do that. And for some people, that's the right place to go. But for a lot of people, it's not.
So is a motivation for you, particularly that you want to see people's minds sharpened and renewed? Yeah,
and I guess I really love that moment when, and this comes from the teacher in me, I'd ended up finding out that the sport thing was actually just an avenue to teaching, and that I really enjoyed that teaching side of things. And the teacher in me just loves that moment when somebody gets it, and whatever it is, they get it, and something changes for them. And I love sharing ideas, and I love this podcast for that reason. That actually people hear stories, and they get inspired, they get thoughts going around in their heads, and actually life changes for them. maybe only in a really, really minor way, but lots of little minor things add up to big things. And so yeah, for me, it really is about helping people to take a step, whatever that step looks like. And if I can be part of encouraging them as they do that, you look at Strengths Finder, learner is my number one strength. And so that then bleeds out of me as well in terms of I get excited about the stuff that I'm learning, and then I just feel like I need to share it with the world because I know what a difference it's made in my life. So
I like how that connects with. I think you experience people using. Well, I mean, some of what you're talking about is just curiosity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being curious about the world and how it works, and not intimidated by what you don't know.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people are intimidated by what they don't know. But also, a lot of people, appears to me, like to learn new information so they can weaponize it and show others that they are smarter or is more superior or whatnot. And I love how that connects with your experience at Excel of learning how do I shepherd my gifts and my motivations behind them to build up other people. And so I think that's a lovely kind of way your journeys come together, that you've learned that lesson of, this information isn't for me, it's for others.
Yeah. In the role of pastor that I've been doing for the last 5 years, a big part of it has been going, how can I use the privileged position I have of this microphone to help people have moments that just really connect them and someone else, them and God, or just give them permission to feel what they're feeling. Or there's so much in church of trying to be something you expect that other people think you should be. So I'm that person who's going, no, actually, let's learn what Scripture actually says about who we are and our identity, because I'd spent that time thinking my identity was wrapped up in all this other stuff and the performance and whatever else. And it was learning, actually, no, that's not where my identity comes from. And that really freed me up to go, all right, so actually this is about expressing that identity somehow. And so giving permission to people to be themselves is a real passion of mine. And yes, sometimes that does mean throwing in some ideas that are a bit different, that people haven't encountered before. And just steering things a little bit away from the expected conversation. A classic example of that is that in my church experience, and it's a lot different these days, I think, as it's becoming different in general society, but mental health was not something that was talked about much. And for people that struggled with it, like me, like my mum, there was this feeling like, I mean, you didn't even get it diagnosed because you were just feeling rubbish and then going, well, but if I'm a Christian and I've got God, why am I struggling? Because, he's supposed to help, I'm supposed to be better. And to then, like I went in my early time as a pastor, I went through a really big patch of depression to the point where I actually went to the doctor and got help and realised that actually I'd been going through this my entire life. Anxiety and depression, and it had never been diagnosed. It had just been me feeling like I was a rubbish dad or a rubbish husband, or someone who couldn't cope with when things went wrong, or all that kind of stuff. And as I started learning that about me, I started sharing about that, and the number of people who came up to me and was like, "Oh, me too," that makes such a difference knowing that that's okay, and like I hate playing the pastoral game of, the pastor's more important, because actually that's a load of rubbish. The pastor is just someone who happens to be in a role to help facilitate stuff and help guide people, but is no more or less important than anyone else. But if there's one way that I would use that positional power, it would be to show my weaknesses and my struggles so that other people can be themselves. That if me talking about really struggling in my relationship with God makes someone else feel normal when they really struggle, then mission accomplished. The last thing that I'd want is for people to look at me and go, oh, here's this guy who's got it all together and I'm useless because I can't, whatever it is. But just to have that joy of uniting in weakness, has been such a big thing for me.
That's, if I was to sort of think through our conversation, that's a pretty poignant self-observation. What do you do with your power is a pretty interesting question. Of course, it's really been raised in recent times, Black Lives Matters and racial injustice and any number of issues. Sort of what do you do with your power? And I think it's really interesting. I just think it's quite profound is that as a pastor to say, well, whenever I get some power, I'm going to show my weakness to give other people both permission to stop feeling shame. Yeah. Shame is of the devil. Yeah. So shame's bad news. Totally. Not much good comes from shame. And so often it's just such a sad layer on top of people's pain, and that God actually wants to, Jesus wants to do something with that pain, but we kind of put shame, this shabby shame thing on. Totally. And so I think that is, that challenges me the way that how do I use things when I get a chance to speak? Do you show that part of yourself? But isn't it amazing how people respond to it?
Yeah, yeah. And the church has been awesome at creating systems that create shame. At least the Catholics have got a confession thing, where that, that's part of being able to offload stuff. Whereas a lot of us, in our traditions, we didn't have that. And so you kind of, especially when the theology is really black and white about this is good, this is evil. And then when you mess up, or however you want to phrase that, when you don't act in a way that you are expected to act, you feel the shame of it. And again, a classic example for me was I was addicted to pornography. And it was really close to ruining life completely for me because there was so much shame attached to it. I'm a massive advocate now for seeing the whole biblical story of sin as not a story of good and bad, right and wrong, but as a story of healthy and unhealthy. And going, actually, this practice is an unhealthy practice. There's, and scientific research around pornography shows that. I guess the quality of the research is like the research that was coming out about smoking a number of years ago, and people were kind of going, nah, smoking's all right. But actually the weight of it's just building up to go, no, it's actually not. Yeah, and you have seen a real shift in tone where it was sort of Christian groups talking about this 10, 15 years ago, and now you're starting to, parents have become a lot more interested in what their kids are watching. And so, for me, I look back on my journey and no one intended to heap shame on me. It wasn't like, oh, you disgusting boy, whatever. But just the system of this is what God wants you to be like, and as you grow, you'll become more like Him and whatever. And then you do something that you feel like you're not supposed to be doing. The shame that comes with that is enormous. Whereas if it becomes a health thing, then it's like, oh man, like I did this thing, I looked at this stuff, and actually this is not a healthy practice. So how can I put practices in my life that are more healthy than that? And it becomes a much more open, easier to have discussion because it's not filled with all this heaped on shame. And I say that now like it's a really easy thing. It was a huge journey for me. Right through until, well, actually just the other day was 13 years that I've been clean from it, and just a completely different perspective on it now. But it was ruining things. It was taking up all sorts of time. It was keeping me awake all night, and then it was making me feel terrible about my relationship with God because it affected my identity. I thought I was this scummy, grotty guy that everyone at church looked at and went, oh well, here's this together guy, on fire for God, and in the background I'm hiding all the stuff from them because I don't want anyone to know that I'm not really that guy, and stuff. But yeah, so again, if I can speak out about that and that helps someone, then great. And I've got no shame at all about it anymore because a number of years ago I decided to write a poem about my addiction because I do spoken word poetry, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do this and my parents hear it, they probably need to know what it's about. And so I organised to go and sit around at my parents' house and tell them about my pornography addiction.
It's terrible.
Well, it was terrifying.
You must have been... how old were you when you did that?
So I was 34, something like that, 35.
Did you give them any heads up? Or were you just like, hey, I'm going to pop around for a cup of tea?
No, yeah, I just said, are you guys home tonight? I got something I want to come chat about. And so I talked about it, and if you can talk about the thing that's been the most shameful thing in your life to your parents, you're pretty well on the way to getting past the shame of it. And so, yeah, then like it wasn't a big deal to stand up in a sermon and go, here's an example of what I've been talking about. I had an addiction to pornography, and this is how it's kind of outworked. And
your parents were good?
Yeah, they're great people, eh? And
was it all?
It was super awkward.
Super awkward.
But
something around.
They still love me, and I had to apologise because some of it was in their house without them knowing, but we were able to talk through that and the progress that I'd made and the good things about it as well. So
it's interesting, that process of becoming comfortable with who God's made you and who God hasn't made you to be. And I think there's a real journey of putting to death the person you wish you were and accepting the person that God has made you to be. And, often a lot of these issues can spring up from the fertile soil of us wrestling with ourselves. Can I be okay with who I am? Which sometimes involve, shortcomings and whatnot. And it strikes me that there's two kind of funny areas that people feel shame about. All of the dark, whether it's porn or the dark shortcomings of their life. But then they also feel shameful about their giftings and strengths. Yeah. So like New Zealanders bring an interesting twist where we feel shame about everything, the good and the bad. Yeah. We sort of, and I often think that's also a very interesting form of blasphemy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where God gives you something and you proceed to tell the world that it's not there.
Yeah.
Is that an important part of sort of also what you see yourself doing, is sort of trying to speak encouragement and sort of to draw out people, to help hold a mirror up to who they are and what they are?
Totally. Yeah. And like, again, a huge passion of mine is to see people step into the things that they love doing, that they're gifted at. It's that classic thing of, or like you're sitting in a car and you're trying to turn the wheels while you're stationary, and they don't turn very well, but once you start moving, they turn really easily. And I think some of us just sit in that metaphorical car trying to turn something, but with no momentum behind us, and actually just getting on with something. And so that's something that's good to remind myself about coming into this season for me, of going, I could just sit around and wait for a job to land in my lap. I could just apply for a few things, or I could just start some stuff and see what happens. And put some feelers out there and see where the conversation goes.
And is that, it's sort of the thread that holds many of the interviews that you do in this podcast, is people who have managed to put their, I like to think of it like their saying and their doing together. What they say they think is important, that vocational sense of what they feel, some sense of call to do, or what their talents and giftings are, or what their heart breaks for. But what they say, and then they actually also do something.
Totally.
One of my favourite kind of little sayings, one that's been just probably one of my main ones in my life, is that God cares infinitely more about who we're becoming rather than what we're doing.
Yeah.
But I think what people there don't realise is, which involves doing stuff.
Totally.
So that's how that works.
Yeah. It's that whole, like, it's not about what you do, it's about having faith. Yeah, but faith without deeds is dead. Like, if you're not doing something, you don't have faith. I think people go, I want to make a difference for God, but that looks like this real big change of life. I'm an accountant. I don't want to become a missionary, so I'll just keep being an accountant. And I guess the heart behind this podcast is going, well, how can you be an accountant in a way that's shaped by the values that you hold? How can you be a husband, a wife, a neighbour, a parent in a way that's shaped by those values and shaped by the story of reconciliation that we find in the Bible, a story of extravagant love? What does that story do in your context? So rather than having to change everything and go off and do something else to make a difference, a lot of the time it's actually just changing the way you approach what you're already doing. And so I think a lot of Christians, they're waiting for that big moment, and they're waiting for God to come in and give them that real clear sign. And I always go back to, I think it's fascinating when you read in Exodus, when God encounters Moses at the burning bush, and Moses is like, give me a sign. How will they believe that it's you? And God goes, all right, I'll give you a sign. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you'll worship me on this mountain. It's like, if you think about that, the sign happened after he'd done this stuff.
Yeah.
Not before it.
Yeah, it's not a great sign in lots of ways, is it? It's sort of like you can see Moses is like, you got me.
Yeah, and yet, like, when you think of how life works, there's been so many times in my life that I've just done some stuff, and then I've looked back and gone, man, God was all over that. Like, there was stuff that I couldn't have pieced together about what just happened, but it just happened, and wow, wasn't it amazing how much God moved in that space? What a great sign, But again, unless you've got out and started doing the stuff, started acting out of your convictions, then you don't give God that space to act. You kind of sit around waiting for him to trumpet something to you.
Yeah. I love, I think it's St. Augustine said this. Said sometimes, he kind of says this tongue-in-cheek, but he said, love God and do what you like. And I think that one of the things that we struggle is we're not great at discernment, and to realise that sometimes there are narrowing periods in our life where God's quite clear that you go do this. Often those are the things that the last thing you do, I find, is when God's like, yes, that's the thing I'd like you to do. But actually there's a lot of broad periods where God says it's a playground, and you know how the kingdom rolls. Mm-hmm. You know who I need you to be and who to become, and what would you like to do? Yeah. And we can do this together. And I think we struggle. That I think terrifies us more than the narrow times when it's very clear.
And I think that desire to know the will of God is what actually holds a lot of Christians back, because they don't want to step out of that. And like, that's a great thing, that they want to do what God wants them to do. But I just look at it and go, well, God wants you to love God and love people. Go. What is God's will? That we love God and love people. Carry on. And yes, like you say, he'll step in at times and go, how about this thing? But, if you're weighing up two different jobs and they both resonate with you, I really don't think God minds which one you choose.
It's funny to me how many people are desperate for authenticity. Mm. And to me, authenticity is when what we say and what we do begins to come together. Yeah. When we become integrated, whole people that are coherent and we make sense and we're not hypocrites. And that's a hard road, but where we attempt to put those, and it's painful sometimes to put those things together. But I think it's a beautiful call to action that you have, where you want to see each person acknowledge their gifts, try to get in touch with their values, and actually work out what's their part of the kingdom they can embody. So,
I guess the other thing that probably has been a huge factor for a lot of Christians in terms of stalling that is the Greek philosophical notion that we've fallen into as Christians of that this Christianity thing is about what happens after this life. And it's about getting to heaven. And actually, I mean, again, this podcast is based on the fact that Jesus prayed, like, God, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that his kingdom coming was about actually seeing heaven open up on earth. And so it's not only about what happens after we die. There's some of that, but actually I think it's a lot more about what happens here now. But if your focus is on getting to heaven, then your focus is initially on, have I done the right things to get in the club? And then once you're in the club, there's not a lot of motivation to need to do much else because you've got your ticket. And so, again, that's part of what shaped me when I did my study, that I just suddenly realised that there's this richer story of this God who made everything and invited us to partner with him to create and to grow and to shape it. And that hasn't always gone well, but that's still the invitation. And God's made a way for that to continue to be the invitation. And so his will is that we would partner with him doing that and bringing love into those places where there isn't love, and bringing joy into those places there isn't joy. Mourning with those who mourn, weeping with those who weep, all that kind of stuff. I think those are the moments for me when we start to see that heaven is a space here. And that's the stuff we miss out on when we think that heaven is a thing that we're going to sometime later. And so I've got a real heart for that, to go, people wake up and see that God wants heaven here. And actually the church doesn't even have a monopoly on that. I've got friends who aren't part of the church who are doing some beautiful stuff that is aligned with God's will. And he is using that. He's moving in that space. And
I've got some people I know in the church who are doing things that are horribly not aligned with God's will.
Totally.
So you never know.
Totally. Yeah. And that's like, you've just got to try and keep not being judgmental about things and going, let's all just keep having these conversations and keep working towards loving God and loving people and seeing what we can do with that.
There's a little thing, I think a guy called Mike Breen says that, is a lot of people think of the gospel as very complicated. So what you do with something that's really complicated is then you have to make it easy. He said, but the truth is that the gospel is very simple. It's just very hard.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, loving God and loving people, in one sense, it is quite simple.
Yeah.
Now, each of those words is very complicated. So we're not saying that is like, what? But it actually is that simple. The problem is just it's really damn hard. Really hard. Like when someone hurts you horribly, working out what forgiveness means is really hard. Yeah. It's hard yakka. And that really has resonated with me when I realised that for all the knowledge I know, or this as a learner, there's a lot of hustle that we can deploy to make even the simplest thing complicated. Jesus didn't really mean forgiveness. What he meant was this and that. But part of it is that actually there's a real elegance and simplicity to some of what Jesus came to. And Jesus was saying, it's about me, it's about God, it's about other people. Hey, I just want to totally honour you and thank you for the work you do with this podcast, but also the way you encourage that in others. I think it's lovely hearing, I guess, the way that this podcast is really an extension of your own vocation and of your own sense of putting your saying and doing together. And I love, though, that it's something that encourages other people to do that as well. So thanks for sharing your story. It's been fascinating and challenging for myself as well. So I love that idea of how you use your power and what are you doing, what are you doing with that to encourage others. So thanks heaps.
Thanks for taking over, Spanky.
All good.
So that was my conversation with Spanky Moore. It was a bit different for me this time, being on the other end of the questions. But yeah, we had a really good time. Spanky was great at just digging into different things, at pulling pieces together. And it was interesting for me to hear my journey coming together. Hopefully you found it interesting as well, that there was something in there for you, something challenging, something encouraging. I just offer my story to you as a gift as I try to help to bring a little bit of heaven down to earth. Thanks to Spanky for taking over. Definitely go and check out his podcast with Scotty Reeve. That's 21 Elephants. Really good podcast. Definitely worth a listen, so go check it out. Thanks to show sponsors Ignition Networks for supporting me. And thanks to you all for listening. I really appreciate the support. And if you are enjoying these, if you find value in them, please do share them on social media. Share them with your friends and family. Word of mouth and social media are the best ways to get that out there. Next time we talk to full-time artist Michelle Green, and we hear her story about her journey out of art and then back into it, and now what she does in encouraging people who may have been told they don't have what it takes. So join us for another fantastic conversation. Until then, me inoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Humai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Muro o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawia, kia whakawaia. Engari whakaorangi a mātou I te kino.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. May your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.